notes on the history of anthropological thought, you'll see that most of the kind of scientific speculation that you do in social science came out of anthropology. There's a field of psychological anthropology. There's political anthropology. There's economic anthropology. The only difference is we usually just don't look at our society. In the Western tradition, tends to look only at Western culture, ethnocentrism. Okay? It's sort of, if you've studied, what is it called in liberal arts, what is the body of knowledge you study in liberal arts? It's called the Western... Yeah, something like that. So, it's something like that. And anthropology studies not only the Western, but all. So you can put it in the context of the rest of the world. Okay, so, in the textbook, it says there are 4 subsets or subfields of anthropology. I add major, because there are actually hundreds of subfields. Okay, I don't know why the text left out major, but it did. So, if the answer in the text says, according to lecture, which this is, you have to put in major. If it doesn't, if it says according to text, they don't use the word major, but they should have. We can do this in any order. There are 4 of them. We'll save the biggest one for the last, which is what most anthropologists are. We'll save the one that we're most confused with. Anybody go walking around someplace and say something, and somebody asks you, what do you do? And you say, I teach anthropology, or whatever it is. They think you are an archaeologist. An archaeologist. Okay? A prehistoric, no, it's not necessarily prehistoric, garbage picker. But anyways, archaeology can be spelled many ways. The British and Canadian way is this way. The American way, let's see, is this way, I think. I don't care. You can spell them any way you want. You're being gringoized anyways, Americanized, because if you push the button for spell check, it's all American, isn't it, on computers? Because I've had words that are perfectly good English Oxford Dictionary words that have been rejected by spell check. And, so I don't really care. This is the way you spell it in Britain and most institutions in Canada, although depends on the institution when you go to. When I went to McGill, I realized quite quickly that it was not a Canadian university. It was New York State at Montreal, because everybody going to McGill in grad school was from the United States, and most of them were from New York State, and they all hated each other. I loved it. They just all hated each other. And they couldn't hate me because I was a Canadian. They didn't know what to do with me. They had no way to class me. If you told somebody your school, you'd be put into the school you went to, you'd be put into a stereotypical thing by them, right? But they had no, they didn't know what to do with me, which I enjoy. I got invited to parties on both sides. I mean, what the hell? And then we sat and bitched about those other people, which I didn't even know. Anyway. So, archaeology. Archaeology, there's a definition in the text, whatever the definition is. I've done archaeology. I got paid to do archaeology as a student. There was all kinds of money out to do what we call salvage archaeology in British Columbia. Salvage archaeology is when you're destroying something to build something else. By law, you have to, if they suspect that on the site there's some kind of human occupation or some kind of human edifice or something, it was used at one time by some earlier society, you can stop the construction. They have to do a survey of the site by law in most provinces, and then they have to fund an archaeological dig to very quickly go through and take out what the goodies are that they find. And this happens when they're flooding a valley to put in a hydro dam. They have to pay anthropologists to go in and do a survey and do a dig quickly. It's basically to do archaeology very quickly before the site is destroyed. And the site is spelled this way. That's the place. Okay, I quite stupidly did not, I'm a slow learner, and I put on an exam, what is the name of the site where something was, and they gave me the computer site name. So, when I ask you for its site, it's an archaeological site, it's a geographical location where a person did an archaeological excavation, which we call a dig. So, like, archaeologists are not known for elaborate speech. Most of them I work with look like something they dug up. They were not Indiana Jones. They were not romantic leads in anything. Although I have to admit, when you're in an archaeology dig out in the bush, which usually is the case, you're usually doing this in some place where there's bugs, and Vancouver is surrounded by forest land up into the interior mountains. So you've got bugs, and it rains on the coast. It just rains. You live in rubber boots. You know, it's just like the romance of archaeology. But what I did notice is that on a dig, all of a sudden, everybody begins to look good to everyone else. You know, the food may not be good, the bar's too far away, but people hook up, I guess is the kind. And what is very interesting, there was also, see, I'm an anthropologist, not really an archaeologist. I've done that. So I'm studying the humans. I'm studying the people that are digging. Okay, I'm more interested in their social behavior. And it's interesting, archaeology professors marry their grad students. And the marriage lasts about 10 minutes. It's like, they do their thesis, they realize their mistake, they dump the guy. You know, and I think, wow, this is really interesting. I never realized that all these things were going on in an archaeology dig. I just thought it was National Geographic, you know, stuff like that. Anyways, archaeology is recovering physical evidence of things in the past, both historical and prehistorical. We always think of archaeology taking place in a time when there is no written record. In fact, a lot of archaeology does take place when there are written records, but the archaeology can be used to check historical facts. Because people lie about history. You do some kind of archaeological dig and you find out that it couldn't possibly have been that way. The physical evidence does not support the historical story. And given most explorers and early peoples out in the world, in other countries from Europe, given the fact that they were exploiting the people that they were meeting, or as soon as they got an opportunity, they did. Very often they rewrite history to suit their own interests. What do you think? An example of this, Hudson's Bay Company. Lots of letters coming back from the people at the posts to the head office, saying the reason we're so successful at getting all these beaver pelts and animal pelts is because we do the Christian thing. We treat the natives nicely. They come back to us time after time because we show concern for them. And so this is probably written up, you know, civilizing effect of killing animal pelts for Europeans, you know. This is how you get civilization, and maybe they'll send you a missionary or something. Then we look at the archaeology of a Hudson's Bay post, and we find out behind something or other, there's all these empty, cheap booze bottles. So it's clear that what they were doing actually in many cases was were passing out alcohol, making the trappers, the natives, dependent on the post to get alcohol instead of money. And so the archaeology is necessary to be done because you wouldn't know that because nobody's going to write that down unless they're ordering cases of booze, which I guess they must have at one time, because the booze had to come from the other side. So, that's why we do historical archaeology. But most of the time, because prehistory is a lot longer than history, history is very short. Written word is very short. 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, that's all. No, 5,000 years ago, sorry, 3,000 BC, 4,000 BC, writing. So there's a lot of human existence. If human beings, our species, has been on our planet since 200,000 years ago, it's actually a very short time, by the way. Years ago is YA, we no longer use BC or AD or any of those things that deal with religion. Years ago, if the first modern humans, which is more or less your model, your body, although there were a couple changes at certain times, came on the planet 200,000 years ago, mutated into existence. And history starts about 5,000 years ago. It would be over here somewhere, okay? Then most of existence for humans has taken place in prehistory. Prehistory is when there is no written history. And so archaeologists do all kinds of different time, places, different references. I mean, people, the Egyptian data, the Greeks, for most of the early 20th century, late 1800s, because the upper class in Britain and Europe and places like that had read the classics. They got a classical education reading on the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Middle Eastern peoples through the biblical studies. Those were considered the places where that's where most of the archaeology was being done. To discover, Troy, the source of the story, the Iliad and Homer. All these kind of people were running around looking at Crete, trying to find Atlantis, doing all these things, trying to affirm stories in the Bible. Okay? And what's true about, it's very interesting, it's actually so small a part of archaeology and prehistory. It's amazing. And yet the Western archaeology was really quite focused on that because, of course, people wanted to, say whether the Bible was real, whether the Greek stories were real, and so on and so forth. And they were going from the literature to where they chose their sites to dig. And so you got very prestigious if you dug up something that was cool because it was part of an ancient Greek story by Homer, like Troy. Whereas if you dug in your backyard and found a Roman villa in London, it wasn't quite as cool. You go, well, that's kind of nice. Let's take this mosaic out and put it on our front lawn or something. Anyways, so there are two kinds, and prehistorical is probably more likely to come up with a longer period of existence, and you really do have to do archaeology to get information because usually there isn't much else. Now, archaeologists are not all like Indiana Jones. In fact, Indiana Jones isn't even an anthropological archaeologist. He's a classical archaeologist. He's out there trying to get goodies that are parts of literature's tales, either true or false, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant. Most archaeologists are looking for evidence of anything in places to figure out what stage, what type of societies lived where and what period. And we actually have a very extensive understanding of the types of societies that our ancestors and everybody else's ancestors have lived in. In fact, I would say that since when I started archaeology in the 60s, we have blown the lid off information. It is amazing. We go through almost every 2 years, we have a new earliest ancestor discovered in some place in Africa, And there are other species of hominids, our relatives, okay, discovered regularly all over the planet. We're beginning to fill out the archaeological record to the same extent that we have it for other animals. Finding human remains and human structures and human artifacts, okay, is extremely rare in many cases, the older you get. But there are so many now involved that it really is quite big, all over the place. At the time archaeology was beginning in Britain and Europe, most people just dug a few things. They went to the museums, or some people would go to Greece and steal statues and columns and take them to other museums. But it was a very small scale, and the pharaohs were very important, and the Egyptian pyramids. But now, it's unbelievable archaeology is being done. Bottoms of oceans, tops of mountains. Probably every culture in the world has had some archaeologist work on it at one time or another, and we really are getting good at this. And what has helped significantly is the fact that science has advanced in leaps and bounds. Leaps and bounds. The most important, well, first of all, physical science and weather studies. Telling what kind of climates, what kind of things were going on when they're thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago. You have to do some very complicated geology to do that, and they're doing it. They're doing, big, they take out ships that drive pipes down into the bottoms of oceans and go under the oceans and come up with these core samples that show you the climate, what was happening above when the continents were not even in the same places where they are today. The continents are all moving around, by the way. At one time there was one continent together. They've broken up, they've spread around because the tectonic plates are moving all over the planet. And with all these related scientific studies, we are beginning to understand things we couldn't have possibly understood before. Weather patterns, change in climate, all kinds of things. And we now know that what we're doing to the planet, which is destroying it, is not abnormal for us. It's what we do, as they say. It's what we do as the human species. We go to a place and we screw it up good. And we've always done that, and unfortunately we usually call it civilization. Oh, civilization, we're being civilized. And of course we're just in the process of erecting those buildings over there. In the Mayan world, they were destroying all kinds of things. They were destroying the water system. They were setting up in an area where water was rare. And they had this thing about lime being used to cover the temples. And apparently the process, it was extremely bad for the forest itself because it would not come back. You burn down so much forest that it would not rejuvenate. Then you don't have the trees shooting the moisture into the air, coming back down, and you're waiting for it to show up somewhere else or come from some other place. So it's really interesting. We're learning a hell of a lot more about how many times we've gotten to the brink of apocalypse, and many times we didn't stop it from happening. On a smaller scale than today, of course, but many times we didn't stop it happening. And of course, what is really blowing the top off of studies today are genetic studies. If you'd asked me 10, 20 years ago what was going to be the 21st century, I would have said, oh, computers, cyber, whatever, Now it's genetics. It's genetics. It's unbelievable what they're doing. You're going to, in your lifetime, you are going to see things that are truly amazing. You would never expect. And you're probably going to have to make choices about things. People are going to be mapped, all their diseases, all the ways they can die, all the genetic material that they're carrying, how you can actually trigger things that are genetically part of you, and how you can get rid of things that are triggered when they're not good for you. You know, it's gonna be amazing what's gonna happen in the century, if we manage to keep the planet going, okay? And this, of course, has been a godsend for archaeology and what we call paleoanthropology, a subset of one of the major subsets, paleoanthropology. Paleo means old or ancient. Paleo is studying ancient ancestors of ourselves. And you probably heard the word Paleolithic, okay, which means old Stone Age, yes?
This is the second subfield.
This is a subfield of the major this is a minor subfield, okay?
Of archaeology?
Of archaeology, yeah. Paleoanthropology studies most of our ancestors' existences physically. So we look at fossils, we look at life forms, not just of ourselves and our ancestors, but all life forms, because we're all linked. We're all descended from, you know, little microbes that existed in ocean vents on the floor, sucking down hydrogen from the ocean vents, which were volcanic. And then they mutated the ability to take hydrogen from water. When you get the ability to take hydrogen from water, you don't have to stay near the vent anymore. You now can move throughout the ocean, establishing life everywhere in the ocean that basically almost covered all the earth. And when those kinds of life forms spread out and multiply, you have oxygen being released as you take hydrogen out of the water, going into the atmosphere and forming an atmosphere that you can breathe. So the first life forms on this planet didn't consume oxygen at all, but the process of the evolution of the life forms, by them taking hydrogen out of ocean water, created an oxygen-included atmosphere, which meant that there would be mutations later, eventually to life forms that breathe an oxygen base. Okay? So it's really interesting the things that have gone on, and paleoanthropology studies all of that. It looks at fossils. Fossils are the remains of life forms. Most of you, who hasn't seen a fossil? Other than teachers. Who hasn't seen a fossil? Everybody's seen a fossil. You've seen a fossil of a shell or some kind of creature. You may even have a couple at home because you took them out of a sand, you know, a wall at the beach, and it had a shell creature that had been totally turned to stone. What happens is over time, the minerals, okay, the carbon and everything gets leached out and replaced with the minerals in the soil, and you have these beautiful, it looks like stone carvings of life forms. Okay. When at a certain point in paleoanthropology, when we are looking for remains of our primate ancestors, you are all primates, by the way. You are primates, okay? You are 98% identical to a chimpanzee genetically, very close to that to a gorilla. Most of the great apes are quite closely related to us genetically, but that shows you how much a very small bit of DNA can make an incredible difference in appearance and abilities. Okay? And so we're beginning to, actually the site I'm talking about, in East Africa, we find most of the fossils of our really ancient ancestors. This is not because in East Africa, that's the only place they lived in Africa. Okay? It's because the conditions there are unique. There is something called the Great Rift Valley. and it is formed with the mountains on each side of it in East Africa, and it extends all the way to South Africa, through East Africa, and the Red Sea is actually part of the Great Rift Valley, and it actually extends into the Middle East. That's how big it is. It's where two tectonic plates these are two pieces of the Earth's crust which are not joined. One goes under the other and pushes the other one up, and this forms mountain ranges. Okay? It also creates volcanic activity because one's pushing around the other, so there's a lot of volcanoes in the region. And the reason we find all these early hominid, these are our ancestors, over 1 million years old. We usually put M period for million, 1 million years old. Our oldest ancestors. There is because as one plate pushes under the other, forcing the other one up, creating volcanic activity and creating mountains, they are pushing up the remains and fossils that are well below the ground at the same time. So they are, what's happening is one crust goes under the other. It is pushing fossils that are millions of years old way below the ground up to the surface. And so the reason we find so many of our ancestors in East Africa is not because that's the only place they lived. It's because of the Great Rift Valley creating them being pushed up. How many of you have encountered a dinosaur bone coming out of a snowbank recently in your backyard? I know, you don't have a backyard, you don't have a snowbank, and you don't have a dinosaur. Well, in Alberta, there's the Badlands of southern Alberta. The Badlands are created because it's the dry side of the Rocky Mountains. No rain falls there, so it's very dry. And they're created because one tectonic plate is pushing under the other, forming the Rocky Mountains, pushing them up. And in the process of doing that, way, way under the ground, they are encountering dinosaur bones and pushing them to the surface. This is why the University of Alberta dinosaurs. The Badlands have some of the most beautiful places in North America, in Alberta, southern Alberta, to walk along the banks of rivers and see dinosaur bones sticking out. It's quite common for tourists to be walking in that area. There's a park, and they'll see the dinosaur bones hanging out. It's not because that's the only place that the dinosaurs live. It's because that's where they're being, pushed up because of this making of the Rocky Mountains. You are sitting on dinosaur bones. You're never going to see them. They're so deep down there that when we dug the big hole for the gymnasium, never even got close, not even a peep from a dinosaur. Way down under us, there are dinosaur bones. Okay? But we're not going to get to them unless there's maybe an earthquake, maybe our puny little volcano gets active again. They have that tendency. Okay, Mount Royal? Mount Royal's isn't it a volcano, as far as I know? Yeah, volcanic? No? They're all over the place, It's very hard to find a place to live. They're all over the place. Now, the second thing that's important with the Great Rift Valley is when you have all this volcanic activity millions of years ago, we can actually date volcanic material. Because when it hits the atmosphere, comes up to the surface, it loses some parts of it that change to something else, in a known way once it hits the atmosphere. So we can get a piece of volcanic material and we can test it and we can see how much of this stuff is missing and we can tell you how long that material has been above ground. It's a beautiful way to date fossils. Okay? Dating in the meaning getting the date that they existed. Okay? And in this place, at a place called Lake Toli, over 3 million years ago, we have this amazing site that was discovered where across some volcanic ash that had just come out of a volcano, so it was very fresh, not much in the way of loss of this material. It has to do with potassium argon. Sitting there like mud on the surface, just cooling, and we know it was cool enough because several of our ancestors walked across it. It's like somebody walking in fresh cement. You know, when you have that urge to go tromp in the fresh cement, and, you know, your legacy is confirmed for the rest of your life. You can take your children to show what an idiot you were. Here, this is where I sit. Actually, I think it's kind of cool when people do that. Cement, I'm okay on it. It's when they do the side of my house, I'm not happy. You know. Anyways, so on this site we have a small family of early hominids, upright walking primates, probably our ancestors, or nearly our ancestors, walking with perfectly human feet like ours, not ape-like at all. They weren't walking on all fours, walking across. So we got this incredible site, and we have a perfect date for when they did that because of the volcanic material. The third reason we find things in the Great Rift Valley is because the Great Rift Valley to the east, at least east of the valley, is as dry as a bone. Ethiopia. Okay, if you think of Ethiopia, and you picture in your head of Ethiopia, all that area, Kenya, Ethiopia, is either savanna, that's lion country with animals on grassland, or very dry, non-grassland, very dry, parched. And that's because the Great Rift Mountains allow rain to fall on, the rain comes in from the Atlantic, hits the mountains, falls west of it, and then it's dry in the east. The only time it rains on East Africa is when rain comes in from the Indian Ocean, the monsoon rain, once every 9 or 10 months. Then it comes down in buckets, but the rest of the time it's dry. So East Africa is extremely dry. So what happens is this. The volcanic tectonic activity pushes things that are millions of years below us up to the surface or near the surface. They can be dated easily because there's lots of layers of volcanic material. You can find it in it or around it or under it or below it or whatever. Then it's near the surface. There is not a lot of vegetation holding it together with the soil. The monsoons come in once a year and they just clean it out onto the surface. So every paleoanthropologist runs there every monsoon season because they don't even have to dig sometimes. It's been washed out. The soil's been washed away and there are all these fossils lying around all over the place that you can see on the surface. If they're partially underground, you can see parts of them sticking up that haven't been exposed for millions of years, between 1 million and 8–10 million years. And so that's the reason most paleoanthropologists go there to get the fossils, is because they're the easiest to get, the easiest to date, and the least expensive to get out of the ground in the way, the use of energy and money and all kinds of things. The only problem is you got to bring guns with you. Gonna hire some local people with submachine guns, of which there are many, because this is a constant war zone, a lot of bandits. This place, East Africa, has some of the biggest museums with fossil collections, best in the world. Some of the best experts on paleoanthropology are local academics. But at the same time, you want to have a bunch of guys with, you know, AK-47s looking for the fossils. They're walking around all the time. The local people wander around with an AK-47 and they're looking for fossils. And the local people know what they're looking for because they live in the land of the fossil. They very often find the important things and then call in the archaeologists. So the Great Rift Valley, East Africa, is this heaven for paleoanthropology. And there are other places in the world like this, but these are where our oldest ancestors exist. Because we first came into existence in different forms in Africa. We are all African. All African. You know what you really are? You're an ape. We just don't like to call ourselves we're special. We really are an ape. We're 98% identical to apes. And so we made a special category for ourselves. You know what defines us? We're the apes that walk habitually on two legs. We're bipedal. We walk habitually on two legs. That's what separates us from the apes. Not our brain size, because for much of our existence, our ancestors didn't have brains larger than an ape. A modern ape. Chimpanzees today are not fossil apes. They had ancestors that we share with them. We broke off from a common ancestor with the modern chimp about 4 to 5 million years ago, which is relatively recent. And since then, they've broken off from another ape. They split with bonobos, which used to be called midget apes. We like to study bonobos because everything they do has sex in it. For some reason we like to think it's like us. Apparently, males have a sexual thought once, I don't know who they did the study on, and I'm not even sure this is true. Males once every 11 seconds, females once every 17 seconds. So we actually think we're like bonobos. But in actuality, when they do the studies of the bonobos, and they do use sex a lot to socialize, it's because the females are dominant. The females have the testosterone. They have more testosterone than the males. Unlike chimps, it's the opposite. And so the females, if you want to eat and you're a male chimp, you better try to suck up to a female or you get your head punched in. Okay? And so the males at feeding time start throwing themselves at females in a sexual way. And the females are notably bored. But if you want to see another animal in the animal world that's female with testosterone, it's the female hyena, 3 times the size of the male. It's the female hyenas that kill lions. The males just are there to fertilize and get out of the way, and they eat last. Okay? So we always think of testosterone being a male thing, when in fact females can have more of it in the animal world. Okay? And bonobos do have females who are dominant. And the interesting thing, all the sexual activity, I love this. Of course it's this way. All the sexual activity, and you can appreciate this, is amongst the adolescents. When they actually sat down and figured it out in a couple of studies, it's the adolescents that are practicing. The adults are not practicing. They're doing it in a serious way to get something out of the other one, right? It's sort of an interesting thing. But the adolescents are practicing all the time. They're just, anywhere they go, they're practicing. So it's quite interesting. Okay, now, archaeology. What else about archaeology? I don't know why it's a major field. This is me. I have no idea. It's a bunch of techniques to get stuff out of the ground and learn something. You know, and really the archaeologist is the guy that organizes, or the guy or girl that organizes the whole thing. Okay? And what's interesting about archaeology is it certainly is a realm in which females are as important as males. It really is interesting because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of sacrifice. You have to be willing to spend your time in places you might not even spend a holiday. Okay? Bugs, heat, cold, and every area's got a local danger. If it's wildlife, if it's warfare, if it's bandits, or maybe you're doing something in a parkway, it's cars trying to run you over. You know, I once did a thing in a public park. Got up in the morning at 5 in the morning, went across the North Shore, got into canoes within sight of Vancouver, went across an inlet to a park, and one time I was there defending the pits from a Sunday picnic group, which were kicking soccer balls in the pits. And I said, "What are you doing?" "Well, we're doing archaeology." "Why?" "Well, try to explain it. It's not, it's not. Why would you do that? Is there money in there? Something else. And you know what? The best part was we were halfway in. These are students, making crap money but enjoying it like really a lot, right? Digging in the earth. Somebody says, "We're digging on a burial ground," and 2 or 3 of us, probably not the archaeologists, the anthropologists, are going, "Oh yeah, what? What is it?" We want to know what we're digging up. What was the disease here? This is a mass burial. What is it? It's like, is it dead? I mean, come on, what are we doing here? And apparently it was dead. Well, that's what they told us. How would they know? By the way, bubonic plague. No, not bubonic plague. The plague that killed more people in 1919 than World War I killed, the flu epidemic. So I don't know how many people killed more than World War I, and it was brought back to North America by the soldiers returning. Okay? They needed to find a live one. The health people, to get a sample of a live, you know where they found it? Northern Canada. A small village had it. They buried the people, and the permafrost had frozen the ground, and it was still frozen. So they were able to get live, thawed out and get live. Every time I hear that story, I think, what the hell was I thinking of? Digging in a burial ground, massive burial ground. Anyways, if you dig on the northwest coast, you know what you find most of? Seashells and salmon vertebrae. They ate a hell of a lot of salmon. Just piles of it. Okay, and we had to count the vertebrae. So it's very minute work doing archaeology. You have to do a site report. You have to do a tremendous amount of. If people watch Indiana, they don't get it. He goes out and gets goodies and stuff, and fights and swords. They're not romantic figures. If they are romantic, only in their own mind, archaeologists. And it is hard, bloody, detailed, and it's the kind of work that somebody who's a fuss-ass does, It's like picky, counting vertebrae and doing these piles and whatever. So it was kind of interesting. And yeah, I was enjoyable. I did dig in some places where the weather was so bad that we couldn't work for 2 weeks. It was just raining all the time, and I imagine. So it's interesting to do it. And the other thing I know about everybody loves it. The amateurs know more than the professionals, the people that do it because they love it, and they'll do it for nothing. And they are the best workers. It was amazing. I was just amazed at what people knew when they came in. And the question they asked, which was the best question, is, this is the question you ask: where are the artifacts going? And that's when you know you have a sophisticated audience, because for many years, the Europeans were able to steal everything all over the world by taking it back to their museums. Now, the world knows, hey, where's that going? We have a museum, we want it here. And so it was very interesting when you realized the sophistication of the audience when they came in to ask. Okay, archaeology. I tried to get an archaeology course going here by digging on the site, because if you look over there with the big trees outside that, on the front there, the front near the garden, the big trees there, the trees indicate that that soil, oh sorry, not on the wall, out there, you know, in the front near Sherbrooke. I tried to get a course in the summer taught. It didn't work out, the guy couldn't do it the summer we wanted it, but if you look at the trees here, they're very old, very deep, and this would have been an area that would have had human occupation well back several hundred years, if not in the 15 or 1600s when the Europeans first arrived. So it would have been interesting, but couldn't get the guy to do it who would have the expertise to do it, and you could have had a course where you took a course in archaeology, practical side, and then in the summer could have done the dig, and you would have got some kind of idea what it was like, but it didn't work out. Yes?
If you want to start digging up, like let's say if that did happen, do you need permission?
Oh yeah, you have to have permits. You have to go get permits, especially in the city. It's like, first of all, you have to do a survey, what you think's there. You have to look at all the plans of the building, find out where the pipes are, everything like that. Then you have to probably legitimize that you think that there may be something there that's of archaeological value. And all you have to do to that is get some historical things that places were in this area, which you'll find, and then you dig. But you have to get permission. Don't start digging on your own. Well, maybe in your own backyard, but just don't get the plumbing. Your dad will be very unhappy with you. Okay. Any questions on archaeology? You're going to see one of the trimates later on, one of the three women who made primatology famous. There's Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and what's her name? Geldikas, who did the orangutan. She was working on the dig I was working on. She was our faunal expert. So I have comments about her because I worked with her. She's a very interesting person. I don't know if she ever said a word. And then I see her in all these famous National Geographic specials talking very articulately about saving the orangutan. And I think, her boyfriend, on the other hand, who was a biker, was very funny and a good time. She was so quiet, I don't even know if I'd be in the same room with her and we ever exchanged two words. And then she went on to become as famous as Jane Goodall. Well, not as famous as Jane Goodall. She's the patron saint of chimpanzees. Actually, I saw her at Loyola College. She was here in town. It was really quite interesting how she related to people, because of course people treat her like everybody knows her. It's like a face that people have seen over 4 generations. And she's been doing the good work, so I think she's sort of almost put on a pedestal. She finds it quite amusing. Okay. The next major subfield, is what we'll call, just check my, make sure, is it 06? No, we have 9 minutes, we'll be okay. Anthropological linguistics. Or linguistic anthropology. This is the one where it's very difficult to get courses in this. Sometimes the courses are tied to a linguistics department or separate from other anthropology departments. None of us in this department are linguistic anthropologists, although we do use evidence from anthropological linguistics. The book only uses the term linguistics. There is a slight difference between linguistics and anthropological linguistics. So if you are asked to answer a question on the lecture, you use the full term anthropological linguistics. If it's on the book, you can just use the term linguistics. There's a distinction there that they've missed. They're not exactly the same thing. Anthropological linguistics does not focus exactly as all of linguistics does. One of my colleagues' daughter has done her PhD at the Sorbonne in anthropological linguistics. I don't know if she's ever going to end up teaching here. She's now at the University of Manitoba. But we all use the field because it's a really interesting field. What language actually tells us about, a lot about the way we think, the way we behave. When you see all kinds of things in language that are peculiar to a language, they will tell you about the structure of the language. They will tell you about gender politics. They will tell you about all kinds of things. And every time the society changes its form, those rules and those things will continue in some form, and there will be a change. So you'll see archaeological pieces in a language, you know, that you wonder, why are they in the language? It's because of a previous form. You can tell. There are all kinds of ways to estimate contacts between peoples. Before we had genetic studies, the way we found how one group originated in another group migrating was by looking at their languages. And it's amazing. There are actual rates of migration and change that have been estimated that are fairly close, which tell us when these things happened. To give you an idea, in the American Southwest, in places like Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, there were a group of people who were known as the mystery people for a long time because no European had ever encountered them. They were there before the Europeans arrived, and they built some amazing structures. One of these structures was at Mesa Verde. It was massively huge apartment complexes built at Mesa Verde. So many apartment complexes around ceremonial sites. Huge area, much larger than a living site. Something big in the middle of nowhere, according to what we thought about that area. And this was a mystery because, of course, how did it get there? What was it related to? Who were these people? They were there before the current people. They built these amazing things into the cliffs that harnessed all kinds of water and things that no longer exist there, and so on and so forth. They became so much of a mystery that when X-Files was out first, are we familiar with X-Files, boys and girls? Okay. Well, you will be soon. It's a program on, paranormal and alien contact and things like that. X-Files used the Anasazi as a group of people. They did a couple of their shows as the Anasazi were the mystery people that they were dealing with and had to do with alien contact. Okay? Anasazi is a Navajo word. It means enemy. Okay? Enemy, people. It actually means several things, but this is the closest you come to the end of it. Enemy, people, and it's ancient enemy people. Sorry, I didn't put ancient. Ancient enemy people. You know who the Navajo are? There are two groups of people that are famous in the Southwest. One is the Navajo. One is the Apache. You ever heard of the Apache? Okay. There was a movie called, what's the one about the Navajo? Wind Talkers. Do you know the movie about Wind Talkers where the Americans had a problem in World War II? They didn't want the Japanese to understand what they were saying on their walkie-talkies in the Pacific Ocean War, World War II. The problem was, how do you get a code that the Japanese don't know? So what they did, there were a lot of Navajo speakers who came in and joined the U.S. Marines at the start of World War II because they were warriors after Pearl Harbor. And so they made every one of them a walkie-talkie operator so that they could talk to each other in Navajo, and short of learning the whole damn language, the Japanese wouldn't know what the hell they were saying. We apparently did the same thing in the Canadian Army. There were a lot of Cree in the Canadian Army and Assiniboine, and we used the Cree and the Assiniboine as walkie-talkie users in Europe. I didn't know about that. In any case, the Navajo and the Apache, who are famous as warriors, the Apache had a war chief by the name of Geronimo, who was so ferocious and famous that when the Americans jumped out of airplanes as parachutists in World War II, the 101st Airborne yelled, "Geronimo." Okay, so these are two groups that are warriors. So the problem they had was, who were the Anasazi? Where did they come from? They had no physical evidence. They started looking at the languages. They found that the nearest language to Navajo and Apache, which share a common language, was not in the neighborhood. These were southwestern peoples, but they could not be the ancestors, they could not be the descendants of the Anasazi, because the closest related language to Apache and Navajo was, well, you'll never guess where. Lake Athabasca in northern Canada. Lake Athabasca. So these people were related to the people that we call today the Dene. And you know where the next language that's related to them is? In the middle of Siberia. So these people must have migrated late to northern Canada before the Europeans arrived, and before the Europeans arrived went way south. And they could not be the descendants. And so when they checked the other evidence, they found that the Zuni Pueblo peoples, okay, who also were in the neighborhood, had to be the descendants of the Anasazi. And so by eliminating groups on the basis of language grouping, they were able to tell this. I mean, there are mysteries in Europe. There's a language in the Pyrenees called Basque. And there is no related language to it anywhere. Usually languages leave a trail. They don't know where Basque came from. There's Basque on one side of the Pyrenees in France, on the other side in Spain, but the language itself has no known relatives. Okay? Which is very odd, because you can usually have it. And this is the kind of thing that anthropological linguistics does, and this is called, that little study there of tracing the migration is called historical linguistics, which you'll read about in the book. Now, you should have copied down all these names and spelled them correctly. Okay, I'll leave them on in case you haven't. So, I will start, I meant to take attendance today, but we don't have time. I'll start taking attendance next day. Okay? Did I take, oh, that's right.